March 10, 1888, the Fredericton capital, Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Hatfields and McCoys. The warring families of Pike and Logan counties. A long series of bloody murders which have become a scandal in 2 states, map of the region, and portraits of some of the people interested. Pike County, Kentucky, and Logan County, West Virginia, separated by a little stream called Tug River, have for many years been the scene of warfare, bloodshed, and murder, such as one might rather expect to find among the Rocky Mountains 30 years ago than in a country which has been settled more than a century. 2 factions, the Hatfields of Logan County and the McCoys of Pike County, have been engaged in murdering each other for 25 years. In 1863, Captain James Vance, a Hatfield, an officer of the Confederate Army, made a raid during which he met one of his former friends, a McCoy, whom he shot. This was, in the Hatfield-McCoy War, what the firing on Sumter was to the nation. Some time after, 3 McCoys lurked near Vance's house for the purpose of filling him with lead. Vance's wife, however, pretended to look for her cow, spied out the enemy's camp, and informed her husband. Vance slipped out the back door, got in the enemy's rear, killed 2 of them, and put the 3rd to flight. Then, the McCoys met one Stratton, a Hatfield, on a road in Pike County, and scored one for their side by shooting him. About 5 or 6 years ago, Johnson Hatfield, a son of Captain Anson Hatfield, met and wooed a McCoy girl. One night, he ran her off. He lived with her till he became tired of her and then let her go. By this time, Winchester rifles became plentiful, and the warfare began to be practiced on a large scale. One day, after an election, 3 McCoys knocked down a Hatfield and cut him up into mincemeat, whereupon Captain Anson Hatfield raided Pike County and carried off the 3 offending McCoys. These McCoys, one of whom was but 15 years old, they tied to trees and amused themselves in pouring bullets into them till they were dead. After a good many more murders, the state of Kentucky, concluding that if she did not interfere there might be bloodshed, offered heavy rewards for Anson Hatfield and several of that gang. Frank Phillips, a McCoy, was then deputy sheriff of Pike County, Kentucky. Taking the warrants, he led a gang into Logan County and captured the stepfather of a man for whom he had a warrant. Soon after, another raid was made into Logan County, West Virginia, resulting in the capture of more prisoners. Then the Logan County regulators gave notice that if there was any more fooling, somebody might get hurt. This kept the peace for a while, but not long. On New Year's night, about a dozen Hatfields surrounded Randall McCoy's log cabin and called on him to come out and surrender. McCoy was naturally timid about obliging them, whereupon they set the house afire. All the occupants of the house except one, including an old woman and a young girl, were shot down. The escaped man was Randall McCoy, whose wife, 4 sons, and a daughter have been killed. Captain Vance of the Hatfields was the next to fall. The McCoys went to his house when he was away and robbed it. An old woman, Mrs. Vance, Captain Vance, and Captain Hatfield were returning home when they met the McCoys. Captain Vance ran down the mountainside he was descending at the time. As soon as the McCoys saw him, they opened fire, which the captain returned. Mrs. Vance was about halfway between the 2. She held her ground, the bullets flying by her thick and fast. The McCoys yelled to her to sit down, but she wouldn't. They called out that they wouldn't shoot her, and she told them to shoot. Presently, she heard Vance shout, "Rally on the top of the hill, boys." Then she knew he was hit and delirious. The old lady told them they needn't fire any more. It is supposed that this murder was not inspired by the noble purpose of the former ones, but that it was simply to acquire possession of the captain's rifle, and it is supposed that the fight will go on yet many years, or until someone in authority with nerve puts a stop to it. But the violent death of the last Hatfield and the last McCoy may occur in the meantime. October 8, 1889, Montreal Herald, Montreal, Canada. Victims of the Old Feud. 4 more murders in the Hatfield-McCoy vendetta. Piketon, Kentucky, October 4. The old Hatfield-McCoy feud has broken out again, and 3, possibly 4 more lives have been sacrificed to the bloody vendetta, which has now lasted for 27 years. 22 murders had resulted from the feud, but it was thought that the recent conviction of Elihu Hatfield and 2 of his gang at Charleston, West Virginia last month would put an end to the work of assassination. Elihu was sentenced to be hanged, and 2 others got life sentences. The remaining relatives have evidently determined to carry on the feud with even greater bitterness than before. Peter McCoy, a farmer, lives 70 miles from a railroad station and has taken no part in the quarrels between the factions heretofore. He is a member of the McCoy family of Pike County, Kentucky, upon whose testimony the 3 Hatfields were recently convicted. He had a pretty daughter, and she fell in love with one of her father's farmhands named John Hand. Hand was a relative of the Hatfields, but, like Peter McCoy, had refused to recognize the leaders of the 2 factions or to engage in their quarrels. The marriage was set for last Tuesday, though both the lovers had received warnings that a wedding would never be allowed to proceed. The Hatfields are more bitter than ever in their enmity since the conviction for murder of 3 of their number, and they were greatly exercised over the fact that a relative was to marry into the hated McCoy family. The McCoys, on the other hand, were equally incensed at Peter for allowing his daughter to receive the attentions of, much less wed, a member of the rival faction. Bitter threats were made by both factions, but the young people went along with the arrangements, and on Tuesday night there was a wedding party in Peter McCoy's farmhouse. There were many guests present, and a bountiful feast was spread. Miss McCoy and Hand stood up in front of the clergyman in the middle of the room, and the marriage ceremony was begun, when suddenly, without any warning, a volley was fired through the window. The young couple fell dead on the floor, and the clergyman was fatally wounded. Members of the family and guests rushed from the house to intercept the murderers, and, as they did so, another shot was fired, fatally wounding a man whose name is not given. Details of the affair are meager, but it is said that a posse of farmers and mountaineers started in pursuit of the murderers, and a desperate conflict was anticipated when they met. It is not known whether those who did the shooting belonged to the Hatfield faction or to the McCoy family. There is a report that members of the rival factions dropped the feud for a day and united in preventing what each felt would be a disgrace to his own party. The Hatfield-McCoy feud began during the war about 1862 between Jim Vance of the Hatfield crowd and Harmon McCoy. Ever since then, it has continued with murderous bitterness. 22 men, women, and children have been shot down in open warfare or butchered by ambuscade, and the vendetta, which started between the 2 families, is now shared in by large numbers of partisans. The Hatfields are located in Logan County, West Virginia, and the McCoys are in Pike County, Kentucky, just over the line.